A sense of unity is one of the most important things an army needs. If there is no sense of unity, the army faces disintegration. So much so that many times in the history of the world, armies have disintegrated and lost wars due to the lack of sense of unity. In order to provide this feeling, commanders must take the lead. However, as you know, the Russian army is facing great difficulties. The tension between Russian commanders and the Russian soldiers is causing great problems. Hello, the Pioneer viewers, how are you? I hope you're healthy and well. Today we will talk about interesting developments in the Russian army again. Recently, a very remarkable report about the Russian army has emerged. We often bring you the developments on the Kherson front line. The attacks of the Ukrainian army continue. The Russian army is suffering heavy losses in the face of attacks. There is a very important reason for these losses suffered by the Russian army on the Kherson front line: the conflict between Russian troops and the Russian commanders. The report in question also provides us with details about this conflict. So, what are the issues mentioned in the report? Let's analyze the developments together. As the Pioneer team, we continue to convey the Russia-Ukraine war to you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. You can also help us reach more people by commenting on our videos. I read all your comments. Let's start if you're ready, the Pioneer reports. As we have just mentioned, and as we often mention in our map reports, the Ukrainian army's advances and attacks on the Kherson front line continue. We also know that the Russian army has suffered heavy losses during these attacks and has withdrawn from some areas on the east bank of the Dnieper River. Recently, a report was published which reveals the weakness of the Russian troops in the region. According to the Ukrainian sources, the situation of the Russian army provides a great advantage for the Ukrainian armed forces. Allegedly, Ukrainian strategies are following the Russian army step by step. During this follow-up, regions where there are major problems among the Russian troops are identified, and the Ukrainian army concentrates its attacks on these regions. According to the latest reports, a major mutiny broke out among the Russian troops on the Kherson front line in recent days. According to the allegations, Russian commanders ordered Russian soldiers to attack the Delta islet on the Dnieper River. However, Russian soldiers refused this order given by the commanders. As you may recall from our map reports, the Russian army suffered many casualties on the Delta islets in the Dnieper River. Therefore, we can say that the Russian soldiers have a trauma here. In other words, it can be seen as a quite normal situation that Russian soldiers don't listen to the orders of the Russian commanders. However, there is an even more striking details here. This detail is related to another part of the front line. According to the allegations, other Russian soldiers, encouraged by this incident, began to ignore the orders given by the Russian commanders across the Kherson front line. According to the Ukrainian sources, the revolt of the Russian soldiers spread to all the detachments on the east bank of the river. Although there is no clear statements on this issue in the Russian sources, we see that they make statements stating that the Russian soldiers are in a difficult situation on the Kherson front line by referring to previous reports. We have often shared these reports with you before. Problems for the Russian army on the Kherson front line are not from one angle. There are problems from many different angles. The Ukrainian armed forces, on the other hand, have been identifying the problems quite successfully since the first days of the intensifications of the hostilities in the region and determining the attack strategy accordingly. From this point of view, we can say that the Ukrainian armed forces are in a very successful situation. The Ukrainian armed forces preferred not to make statements about the situation in question. Allegedly, Ukrainian officials prefer not to share the data they currently have on the situation of the Russian army. Ukrainian officials want the information they have about the Russian army not to be known by the Russian army. If the Russian army has access to the information held by the Ukrainian army, it can better identify its weaknesses and thus positions itself according on the front line. Therefore, we have to say that this is a very logical move for the Ukrainian officials not to comment on the situation at the moment. You know from our map reports that the current situation on the Kherson front line is in favor of the Ukrainian armed forces. According to the latest reports, the fighting between the Ukrainian armed forces and the Russian armed forces have come to within a few kilometers of the M14 motorway. This motorway is a critical point between the western Russia and the occupied southern Ukraine. Therefore, even the slightest incident here can be considered as something that can lead to major changes on the front line. Recently, a very interesting statement came from former Ukrainian officer Ivan Shtupak, who served in the Ukrainian Security Service and is currently an advisor to the Ukrainian Parliament's National Security, Defense and Intelligence Committee, stated that about 300 Ukrainian Marines serving in the Ukrainian army are serving on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, and said the following: "I'm confident that the operation on the Kherson front line is potentially successful. At least a few pieces of heavy equipment have also been transferred to the left bank. The main target here will be probably the Black Sea port of Ishkadovsk. If our troops succeed here, we can cut off the Russian troops defending Kinburn Spit. In this case, we can take the Crimean Peninsula under the fire control of the US-made HIMARS missiles." As you may recall, the recent storm has affected the Russian army considerably. According to recent reports, the severe impact of winter continues to have an impact on the Russian army. According to the information we have obtained from local sources, the effects of the winter on the Russian military infrastructure are rapidly increasing. According to the information provided by the Ukrainian sources, Russian troops on the Dzhaliach island were isolated from the Kherson region after the severe storm. In this situation, it is possible to say that the Russian troops in the region are facing a major problem. As we have mentioned throughout our report, the Ukrainian army largely maintains its advantageous positions on the Kherson front line. It is wondered how long the Russian army will be able to maintain its presence in the region, which faces more and more difficult situations every day due to the increase in the problems experienced by the Russian troops and the natural conditions. As you will remember, about a month ago, as the Pioneer team, we stated that the Russian army would face major problems in the winter conditions. Pioneer team was right once again. Considering that the snowfall period is approaching, we can say that very difficult days await the Russian army. What do you think? Do you think the Ukrainian army will be able to take advantage of the advantageous situation on the Kherson front line? What do you think about the internal conflicts of the Russian army? Can these conflicts grow? If so, how will this affect the front line? Let me know in the comments. I read and care about all your comments.